I've worked as a correctional officer for a long time. I've worked at facilities in Texas and in Michigan. The oldest prison I've ever worked at just recently started to close in Michigan, and it got me thinking about all the paranormal experiences I've had there and in the other prisons I have worked at. I'd like to share with all of you some of the more notable paranormal experiences that I've had while working in these prisons. First off, I'd like to say that I never really believed in ghosts before I started working as a correctional officer. I started off working in Texas at an intake facility. I worked night shifts, 12 hours from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. The first experience that I ever had was working on a lower security housing unit. When finishing a round, I was chatting with my partner and I heard a loud banging sound. It was at like 3 a.m. at this point. No prisoners should be out of their bunks. I asked my partner if they knew what the banging was. They, being an older officer, told me bluntly that the unit we were working was haunted. They told me the sound was coming from a door of one of small quiet cells in a hallway not directly visible from the officer station, and about how a prisoner had died in one. The prisoner allegedly died because the officers working there at the time had given them a sack of food when it was lunchtime for prisoners, and the prisoner had choked on the food and died. I really didn't believe that the unit was haunted, so I decided to go look at this door. The loud banging got increasingly louder as I got closer to the door. The door itself was visibly shaking as if someone was pounding on it, and there was no wind, nothing that could have been causing the door to shake like it was. I was just at a loss for words at this point. Later that night, I checked the door again, and there was a steamed up hand print visible on the glass of the door's window. One more notable one was from Texas. I was working in an ADSEG unit, a really high security unit for prisoners that get in fights and cause a lot of problems repeatedly. We had a prisoner who was sitting in one of our close observation cells. These cells are usually used for people who threaten harming themselves. In the summertime, prisoners will sometimes just say that they are suicidal, just to be put in one of these cells because they are a lot cooler and are near a sea vents that the normal housing units don't have. The prisoner told me that this was what they were doing and that they didn't want to cause any problems. Later on that night, one of my partners and I were watching the cameras, and all of a sudden, we see a shadow moving across the floor. Eventually, it came to the close observation cell and disappears under the door, and this is where it gets a little crazy. I do a round and check on the close observation cell, and saw the prisoner is pacing inside. I ask the prisoner if they are okay, and the prisoner tells me that something doesn't feel right and that they are hearing voices that aren't there with him. I calmed the prisoner down, and thankfully, they did. Later on, my partner calls for assistance because the prisoner had bit on their own wrists, causing them to bleed, and held it up above their heads, causing the blood to stream down their arms while allegedly speaking in tongues. In Michigan, I worked at a prison that's now closing. It was built back in 1877 and is one of the oldest prisons still operating in all of the United States. There were so many small experiences that I've had here. Doors would slam, you'd hear voices and feel cold chills. The first really notable experience I had was around Christmas time on third shift. I was working in the oldest unit on the facility. Usually we don't have prisoners there, but we had opened the unit to separate prisoners during the COVID pandemic. I didn't have a partner due to how short-staffed we were, so one of the other officers had set up a TV for me to keep me entertained because I'd be really far away from all the other units and get bored with no one to talk to. I do rounds for most of the night while watching TV in between them, when suddenly, I hear this banging noise coming from a door that leads to a hallway that takes you all the way to an even older unused condemned part of the prison. So I open the door and take a look down the hallway, when a sudden cold breeze hits me and I started having goosebumps, so I immediately closed the door, thoroughly creeped out. I just ignored it and went back to watching TV. As I was doing that, the TV suddenly started flipping through channels rapidly before stopping on static. I was so scared shitless that I had to move to a different unit after that. The last one, and probably the scariest of them all, was on another third shift with my work friend. We were working positions that allowed us to have a lot of free time and no prisoners to watch, which eventually made us come to decision to explore the prison. So we went exploring the tunnels that went underneath the prison, the old barns, and the old unstaffed gun towers, before we eventually arrived at the old condemned part of the prison from my earlier experience. Arriving there was this big metal gate that was about halfway down the hallway that had to be opened by a big skeleton key. This particular section was already so old that it didn't have any more power running through it, and everything was pitch black, so we had to use a flashlight. And while walking, my friend mentioned about how this part was supposed to be the old segregation. As we were talking, I can just feel the energy back. There was something I won't ever forget. The place just gives off this suffocating feeling, giving you this sense of unease that something bad is about to happen. So we haven't even walked that far yet when I just told my friend that we should just head back, and he agreed as he was also starting to feel scared. Just as we started to make our way back to where the gated part of the hallway was, our only source of light, the flashlight on my friend's hand suddenly freaking dies, which were followed by the darkness swallowing us. To make matters even worse, we suddenly hear something running on dark hallway behind us. We were so freaked out that we immediately started running up the hallway too. Fortunately, we haven't walked that far, so we still had the light source coming from the gate guiding us as we made a run for it. We managed to arrive at the gate as my friend fumbles with the key as we hear it slowly getting closer, and thankfully, we managed to get the gate open in time and sprint out of there before whatever it was in the dark got us, or so I thought when I later on noticed that my friend had claw marks all over his arms. What happened back there was something we would never forget, and a place we would never go back to, ever again.